Welcome, Canadians from all parts of the country to our Housing First Community of Practice call. Again, I apologize for the mix-up in the title slide. We do so many of these that sometimes it gets confusing, but grateful that you're all here and that even though you might have come on and saw the wrong slide, you didn't panic and bolt out of here. This is a Housing First Community of Practice call. Grateful to have everybody here. The recording is happening and it will be available later today. So if people want to review it at some future date, along with that, the PDF version of these slides will be available. But as we get started with the presentation, I'll tell you a couple of things about the slides that, that will be helpful because there's not going to be very many slides. And I'm doing it a little bit differently today, so I hope it works for everybody. We would really appreciate that you're prepared for the latter part of this hour-long call for discussion and questions, and I hope to be setting it up so that I will be prying out different thoughts and ideas that you have, and we'll go forward from there. I'm going to actually stop my video now and get on with the main part of all of this. So as many of you probably know, my name is Wally Czech. I'm the Director of Training for the Training and Technical Assistance Program of the Canadian Alliance. And I'm always excited to be on here and sharing information and learning from all of you. On that note, I do want to say that any of you on that, if you have ideas for topics that you think would be really good or really valuable, community of practice calls or webinars, please feel free to share that with me. You can either do that through email or you can even post it on the chat here if you like. And if any of you would be interested in presenting for these, we're more than happy. In fact, we love to have people outside of the Canadian Alliance coming in and doing these things. So I'll put that little plug in there for now. The Canadian Alliance is a diverse organization and we're becoming more diverse all the time. As you can see, we have the conference Built for Zero Canada, which focuses on binding lists and coordinated access work and systems work. The Training and Technical Assistance, we're also doing some work in the area of coordinated access and binding lists for designated communities that are not part of Built for Zero. But we also are a training and technical assistance consultancy, so we provide training in multiple areas of ending homelessness, including Housing First and other related best practices. We also have our allied networks, and I would encourage all of you to actually go to our Canadian Alliance website and click on the allied networks. That's an ever-growing number of allied organizations that we're working with. Today we just launched the Women's Homelessness Network, and we have multiple other components of partners that we have, like the National Alliance to End Rural and Remote Homelessness and various other organizations, Veterans Homelessness, different groups like that we are partnered with and are supporting in their work moving forward. So again, I would encourage you to go on and have a look and see who's all included there. We always want to mention our mission. Of course, it's very simple, but I think very powerful and important mission to essentially help communities across Canada end homelessness. And we always want to mention that we are in part funded by the federal government of Canada, and that being Reaching Home. And we're always grateful for their contribution and support in the work that we do. So I wanted just to always briefly mention a little bit about what a community of practice call is and the process. I've already kind of mentioned it, but the idea is it's still going to be an hour-long call, but the idea is to have a shorter presentation and then have lots of time for question and answer and discussions. And as I already said, the slides and the recording of this call will be uploaded and available for viewing later on. Usually by the end of the day that we have these, they're up at the very latest the next day. So you can see all of our archives of past recordings and webinars in the archive section of our webinar tab on the Training and Technical Assistance website. That's at training.caeh.ca. So again, please make sure that you are muted. Later on, there'll come a time when you can unmute yourself after I have allowed the unmuting to occur so that you can talk and correspond. What I would ask is that if you have had a chance to be speaking and then you're kind of finished speaking, if you would please then remute yourself so that any of your background noise might not be there or might be kept out while someone else is maybe talking. And then if someone does want to talk, please put your questions in the chat or the Q&A feature, and or you can raise your hand, but I'll be paying attention to what's happening in there, and then we'll be trying to capture everybody's questions and comments as we move along. The agenda for today is, as I said, is a little bit different. I'm going to be doing a little bit of a mindfulness activity with you, but it does have something very directly to do with our topic today. I'm going to have a few introductory slides, and I'm going to tell you a story that many of you may have heard already. If you've heard me do any Housing First presentations, it's possible that I've shared it with you there. And then I'm going to show you a video presentation. And then once that's done, we're going to have some discussion around questions and ideas that have come up for you with the information that was shared. And then I'm going to bring us back to the mindfulness activity and kind of come full circle and connect the dots as to why I did that. And then we'll close off. So let's move on. So we are here today to talk about community and social integration in implementing our Housing First practice. So to get started with that, I want to ask you all to do something. So what I want you to do is I want you to go in your head, and I want you to think to yourself about something that you personally really struggle with. And as the statement says, perhaps no one else even knows about this struggle that you have. But I want you to think about that and get it in your mind. And so take just 5 or 10 seconds to really get yourself clear on what it is you're thinking about. Now, if you've got that in your head, the next thing I want you to do is I want you to allow yourself to become aware of a few things. I want you to think about what you're experiencing now inside your head. What are the thoughts? What else is going on and rolling around in your head? Then I want you to get in touch with your body in relation to this. So I want you to think about how you feel in the upper part of your body. Think about what maybe you feel in your face, your facial muscles. Then I want you to consider what you're experiencing down into your neck and your shoulders. And then I want you to even go down further into your chest and pay attention to your heart and your stomach and how those things are interacting with you, again, based on your thoughts about this struggle that you have that has been a challenge for you. And again, maybe nobody knows about it, but it's been a definite struggle for you in your life. And think about what is it you're experiencing as you think about that. Now what I want to do is I want to ask you to think about, what if I asked you each to use the chat feature to share with everyone what that struggle is? So just think about that for a minute. Now, I just checked and I don't see anybody rushing to the chat function to type what that problem is. I see no one putting it in there, and I'm not asking you to. So please don't feel like you need to. But the point is to get in touch with what it felt like to even consider the idea of typing this problem into the chat where everyone else on this call could actually know what's going on for you. Now, as I said, I'm going to come around back to this at the end of the presentation today. But to move forward, I want to tell you a story. And as I said, many of you might be familiar with this story, but I believe it's very directly related and very powerful message in relation to community and social integration. Something happened here. So in the 70s, there was a scientist who decided to do an experiment with rats. And what that experiment consisted of was he would take a rat and put it in a cage, as you see in this picture. But each cage had 2 drinking apparatuses. One of those bottles was filled with simply water. Another bottle was filled with water that was laced with heroin or cocaine. And as you might imagine, what would happen is that the rats would gravitate to the drug-induced water, and they would use it repetitively, obsessively, and use it to the point of essentially, death by drug consumption. And this experiment, this simple experiment all by itself, is actually what led to the worldwide war on drugs that happened for many years. And as a result, there were harsh laws that were created, extreme punishment for users and traffickers or distributors of drugs, and people were sent to jail and so forth. And so we had this massive war on drugs that was riddled with very strong, harsh, punitive methods to try to counteract what was happening. Well, the interesting thing about this was that later on, in the 80s, another scientist by the name of Bruce Alexander had another idea. He thought there has to be more to this experiment that we're not seeing. So what he did is he built or created what's called Rat Park. And in Rat Park, instead of what took place in the original experiment, there existed like wheels for the rats to run around in, balls to play around with, boxes to hide in, lots of food and things that rats like to eat. And of course, there was multiple other rats that they could do all kinds of things with. And I'll let your imagination take you away with that one. But the one thing that was consistent was the 2 different types of water bottles. There was the water bottle with water, and there was a water bottle with drug-induced water. So the interesting thing about this was that virtually none of the rats ever used any of the drug-induced water. None of them became addicted. And so because of that, they took the experiment to another level, and they would take a rat and put it back into a cage by itself with the drug-induced water and got them extremely addicted. But then what they did is they put the rat back into Rat Park, and every one of the rats that they did that with weaned themselves off of the drugs and were no longer struggling with that addiction. So what's really sort of mind-blowing and powerful about this message is that we also have human experiments that occur like this all the time. So some people who've gone into hospital for significant surgery and problems have had to have pain medication to be able to deal with recovery. And oftentimes, one of the most powerful, purest forms of heroin is used as pain medication in hospital. And so, for example, my father, when he was in his late 80s, had broken his hip and had to go into hospital to have that repaired and then to spend time in recovery. And he was dealing with, having to have pain medication as well. But my dad did not come out of the hospital as a heroin junkie. And the question one might ask is why? Another really important worldwide known human experiment like this occurred in Vietnam, where many of the soldiers in Vietnam were regularly and daily using heroin to deal with the impacts and difficulties associated with that war. And the US in particular was extremely worried that when the war ended, that they were going to be then infested with a whole army of heroin addicts. But the interesting thing is that that didn't happen. A very, very small percentage of the individuals that were using heroin in Vietnam came back and continued to use heroin. For the most part, they all quit using that substance. And so again, the question is why? When we look at family coming out of hospital for surgery and things like that, that's the thing, is that they have family that they have to go to. They have family that care about them. They have people that love them and appreciate them. And it probably had people coming and visiting them in the hospital. Those soldiers that came home from Vietnam, many of them, most of them came home to loving and caring family members. Whereas the individual who is addicted to drugs on the street, yes, they have people around them. But one of the things I commonly hear is that even though they call them their quote unquote street family, many of these individuals don't trust the people that are out there on the street with them. And many of them often feel very alone and very abandoned in their life and in their problems and their situations. So I think the key message here is, when we're dealing with addiction and other problems that are associated with homelessness, is it really about the addiction, or is it potentially about the cage that they have lived in or currently live in? And what is it that's being actually medicated by those substances that they're choosing to use? So the whole point is, and there's a couple of tremendous authors that have talked about this. One of them is Gabor Mate, where he has stated he talks about how it is important that people who are experiencing pain, and that's really what's happening when people are addicted to substances or other challenges, people that are on the street, they're dealing with pain. And his message is that people can't run away from their pain, they have to be with their pain. And so he says, how do people be with their pain? It's only if they sense some compassion from somebody else. Another author by the name of Johann Hari, who actually brought to light the story of Rat Park and wrote about it in his book, Chasing the Scream, which was about the war on drugs. He says that the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, it is human connection. And so that's what leads us into this topic of social connection and integration and how important that is. And so I'm going to play this video for you. And this video is was created by Rain City Housing out of Vancouver. And they talk about this principle of housing first being social and community integration. And so I want you, as you watch this video, it's about 7 minutes long, I want you to think about, Rat Park and the importance of connection, and how connection is the opposite for sure of addiction, but what else is it the opposite of? And I want you to think about things that you hear in this video that are things you're already doing in your practice, or things that you could potentially integrate into your practice. And then I want to have some discussion about some of those items. So I am going to play this video for you.
Moving to a new area can be a hard experience for anyone and can make you feel pretty isolated and lonely. The Housing First team can help participants build community connections based on their specific needs and interests. The team also fosters community development by providing landlords and community members with education on housing first, inclusion, and myth-busting negative stereotypes. And though supporting social and community integration may take time, it can go a long way in helping participants establish relationships and support networks within new communities.
I've heard a lot of people say that it took them a long time to stop feeling angry once they were housed and walking around the neighborhood, because people would just walk by them when they were homeless, and they just were so upset by that, you know, like as if they didn't exist just because they were on this bench, you know, and now they're walking around and they're just trying to feel a little forgiveness for all of that time of invisibility.
900 years ago, we had asylums. 50 years ago in BC, we had some very large psychiatric institutions. And then more recently, we have this idea of supported housing where we build apartment blocks. What's in common with all that is the notion that people are living with people who share that experience with mental illness. The scattered site sort of pushes that another level. So now they're living in the same kind of housing that people with jobs have and students and whatnot. On that level, the community integration, it feels kind of accomplished in some way. What we haven't accomplished is the social integration and how we relate and include people. And so the sort of the residual stigma and discrimination we have is continuing to be a really significant barrier for people coming into these scattered site communities and really feeling like they belong.
I think it's really a gift for people to be one of many, you know, to be on the bus with other folks on the bus, just going downtown or wherever you're going, to sort of go get your mail out of the mailbox along with everybody else going to get the mail out of the mailbox, in the elevator with other people, living a regular kind of life.
So when somebody moves into a new neighborhood, really working on, this is your community. You deserve to be here. And I think the more we believe it, the more others will. And if not, they're going to have to, because we're coming anyway.
Sometimes you offer choice and people aren't quite sure what to do with it right away. But of course, it has everything to do with also how successful they're going to be in that housing. How connected are they going to feel with the community around them? How easily can they access resources that they use? Or how much joy is it going to be to discover a new community and become connected with those things? As a worker, it's such a joy to be able to offer that, to be able to present people with choice.
It changes the responsibility for chronic homelessness from the person and from service providers to the wider community, and kind of places the responsibility on society as a whole. That kind of aligns maybe with the approach in traditional societies where homelessness is less of a problem, where people see that there's, you know, if somebody's in need, then there's like collective solutions to that.
It doesn't feel like a lot of work to me, you know, like to be kind, compassionate, to be loving, to do no harm, to be empowering. Those things are not, those are part of our grandfather teachings, right? You know, like those things, sacredness, respect and reverence for all life and all humans, and sharing and caring and all that stuff. Like those are hopefully my way of being.
Just in the last year, I'm talking to people in my building. I think that's because we have animal connections, and I tend to talk to the dogs more than the people. I don't really like people very much. But that's just because of what I've been through.
When I moved into BC housing, all of a sudden I had all these friendly people that said, "Hi, who are you? We have a new guy in Found Five." And they wanted to make friends with me now. Like, I was just recently in the hospital, and I got out of the hospital, and oh, we're so glad you're back. We care about you. It is having that sense of establishing community where you live. And as simple as having neighbors down the hall that say hi and they're happy to see you, instead of totally ignoring the fact that you said hi to them every week for 2 years.
Like if you ever move to a city as an adult, it takes a long time to meet people and make friends and socialize, and probably in the period of years. And that's what we saw. We probably took quite a while for people to become social. But what we have seen is lots of people having people over to their apartments, you know, making dinners, and often the way they socialize change. We had a lot of neighbor complaints for a while, and they're like, oh, I don't know about this person. They're causing a lot of problems. They're really loud and they scream and all of these things. And the landlord was really on his side and was like, you know, we just need to give it time. And eventually he kind of just, we stopped getting those complaints, and they started to spend time together, the landlord and this person. And he would go over there and they would have strawberries on the balcony together, and, you know, like really
start to become known in the community. We've seen a lot of things like that, of just people fitting in and feeling comfortable.
From a landlord perspective, they have tenancy issues from all over. They're not from just mentally ill clients who have been homeless. They have people who leave the country. They have students who trash apartments. They don't have any support with those tenants. So landlords just embrace the fact that they had somebody to call.
What we've always kept as our sort of our mission statement is to focus on the social determinants of health, the things that we can actually, have some impact on people's lives, like food security, like access to meaningful community participation through, social enterprises that we run, or volunteer positions, recreation, leisure, vocational programs.
80% of our clients at least have identified that they would like to work in some sort of way. So yeah, it's just really finding the employers that are open to someone who doesn't have a resume or hasn't worked over the last 10 years. People are wanting to know where you were for those 10 years and why you didn't work, and have a lot of assumptions that they sort of fill in the gaps with. And so, yeah, we have an employment specialist who's great and helps work through a lot of those pieces, but it's still relying on the public to start having an awareness and openness to hiring different people that really want to be there.
And despite the fact that we provide housing for people, everyone we work with still lives in poverty, like gripping poverty. Making it from check to check is incredibly difficult. So all the barriers of living poor still exist for everyone.
And it's becoming increasingly difficult the longer homelessness stays a problem, because now there's a whole generation of people, people under 30, think that homelessness is part of the landscape, and it isn't. I think social inclusion is not about the clients; it's about all of us. We all have to make a little room at the table and allow for one more guest to be part of it.
So I hope that that video brought out some thoughts for you and created either questions or maybe even some brain surges about some things that you need or want to think differently about in your practice, and some of the important aspects of why it's important to build that community and social integration component into your Housing First practice. In my work, and I think I mentioned this in the description of this community of practice call, is in my experience, I have seen more than not the two key reasons why people lose their housing is due to boredom and loneliness, and then that creates all kinds of challenges where individuals either then bring their old life into their new apartment, which creates problems, or they leave their new home to go back to that old life to fill that gap that's missing, to try to not be so lonely all the time. And and so I think it's so key that one of the first things that we do in our Housing First practice, once we get someone housed, is to help that individual create those connections. Have positive social supports in their lives that they can depend on and trust, and how do we help them build those relationships? And then also, how do we help them be integrated into the community in a way that is meaningful to them? Community integration doesn't mean that they have to be participating in multiple different kinds of programs and so forth. It just means that they feel connected to the community, and community can be defined by them as well. For some people, community integration might be that they have good connections with people through their online world, or it could be that they are connected to their neighbors. And so one last little idea I'm going to throw at you that I have shared often in the past that I think is just a valuable little tool or concept to use when you're working with folks that have moved into housing. It's called know, known, and missed. And what it really means is that if someone moves into a new apartment, if you can help them to be in a place where they know by name 2 of their neighbors, and then there's 2 additional neighbors or people in their apartment building or whatever who know them by name, so they're known. So they know 2, and then they're known by 2, and then they have enough interaction with these people that when your client or your participant is maybe away from their home for a significant amount of time, the people who are around there recognize that, and they miss seeing them around, or they notice that they're not there. If you can create that kind of an environment, then you've established a pretty solid state of connection and integration, at least into their immediate home environment. So now, at this point, I want to open things up for questions, for discussion. What did you hear in this video or in that Rat Park story that struck you? What are some things that you are doing currently in your practice that have enabled you to establish good social and community integration into for your participants? And what are maybe some challenges that you have that you'd like to throw out there and ask questions about in relation to that? So now I saw that someone had raised their hand. So I have a quick question here. And so this is from Jacqueline. And Jacqueline, I'm going to actually go and unmute you if that's okay. If you have a mic and you can actually speak to your question. If you don't have a mic, then let me know. But I'm just going to find you on the list here. Let's see. There you are.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Oh, hi. Hello. Hi, Tim.
Hi there.
Hi.
Where are you from, Jacqueline?
I am actually from Brampton, Ontario.
Okay. Great to have you.
Oh, thank you. And so part of my question was around just asking, because I guess we're at a point where we're trying to look at different things within our program. So my question becomes, I know that there's a lot of support and validity around peer support, and if it's not something that we have access to at this current time. And so wondering whether, is it the peer support fundamental to this social integration versus like, we are able to achieve the social integration through, client worker interaction around just getting them, doing things to get them, to sort of familiarize themselves with their community. So I was just trying to figure out where we should more or less lean, or is it just or is it a situation where it's in the middle, where either ones are equally as impactful?
Yeah, great question. I certainly have my thoughts, and I'll provide my response here, but I just want to let anybody else who wants to weigh in on the conversation know that they can feel free to do that. And so, raise your hand or let us know that you have a comment about that. But Jacqueline, my thoughts on that are, first of all, yes, I believe that a program that does not have peer specialists or peer support staff can influence and can establish, this solid social and community integration. However, I think that the speed or the rate at which that happens, and I think the quality or stability of that component of things happens much better when there is peer support staff available to work with them. We would encourage, and in fact, when you look at fidelity to Housing First, and again, what I'll reiterate is that what we have learned through doing fidelity reviews or assessments and so forth, and what's come out of the At Home Chez Soi study and all of the other studies, is that the more in line a program can be with the fidelity to the Housing First principles, the better their outcomes are. One of those elements that is looked at in terms of fidelity is the presence of peer support. And that's why, is because it's so much more powerful that if you have someone that's part of your program that can actually provide that quote unquote I've been there message to the people you're working with, it just instills a greater sense of motivation and hope and the thoughts that, you know what, maybe I can do this, and that they're willing to, I think, allow that peer support person sometimes to guide them in things differently than they do other staff members. So I'm not going to say that you have to have peer support people to develop this strong sense of community and social integration, but I think the peer support component is a key or a crucial element to have to really make it come to life.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you betcha. And again, if anybody else has any comments or thoughts related to that, please feel free to weigh in on that. So again, what other things come to your mind? You know, I'd love to hear from people out there what you currently do to help establish, you know, community integration and connection, because lots of times we think too that community integration is about scattered site housing, and we're therefore integrating people into the community. That's not what it is. That's only one small component of it. And I would also say that if scattered site housing is not really what that individual wants, then I think that scattered site housing is not what you should try to make them have. They might have a desire for something else. They might want supported living. They might want a roommate companion. It's hard to say, right? So I think that community integration is about having people feel like they're part of their community, that they're an actual citizen. One of the comments you heard in the video was how people just want a sense of normality in their lives, and sometimes even just understanding the bus system so that they can ride the bus like everybody else provides a sense of community integration. So I would love to sort of open it up and just, you know, have people, if you want to just type it in, feel free if you don't feel comfortable talking, or if you want to type a question or whatever. But I'd like to hear your comments. What do you do now to help your participants engage socially in healthy ways, and to be connected to people in their community? So I'm going to leave it for a minute and give you a chance to throw some things out there. Silence is deadly, so the pressure's on. So am I to take this to mean that people are struggling with this type of thing? Jennifer, I am going to find you, Jennifer, and I'm going to let you talk. Okay, do you have a microphone, Jennifer?
Yep.
Okay, why don't you go ahead and comment?
So we feel like we've been really struggling with this piece, and at the Canadian Mental Health Association, our mandate is building lives, or building homes, building lives, and building community. We have tons of scattered sites, and that's been a really successful part of our program. So we feel we've been really successful at the building homes piece, but the building lives and building community has been an ongoing challenge. And just, you know, trying to find a place where the participants in our program fit in, and where they're, you know, where whatever they're going to is not based around them being homeless or their mental health or their substance use. So we're really looking outwards at our program participants to see what it is that they would like to do, and what they would like to see happen in their community that they could join. So tomorrow we're actually putting on a participant engagement session. It's going to be participant led, and with different breakout groups with different themes about what makes them, like what makes a home, what makes people feel safe and supported, what they'd like to learn and what they could teach others. And this is all to lead into a peer specialist role that we're hoping to launch.
Beautiful.
early summer. So I was wondering if anybody else across Canada has done this before, and if they have any tips or input on what to do and how to make it go smoothly.
Yeah, that's a great question. I love the process. I think it's a great idea, by the way. And you know, having, we often talk about that again, from a Housing First perspective, having as much of your program that allows for participant input as possible on all levels. And so, you know, doing this, I think, is going to be something that process alone, I think, is going to go miles for your participants in feeling like they're now having more control over their lives and having a say and having input in ways that you can assist them. And so I think that's a fantastic idea. I would also add that, you know, one of the things I found that's interesting, and sometimes I think we think that, you know, and you made the comment, I don't remember exactly how you put it, but something to the effect of, you know, people want to sort of get out of this sense of them being homeless and so forth. Sometimes I think we believe that in order for that to happen, that they need to be connected to and integrating with as many people as possible that are not homeless or that have not experienced homelessness. And one of the interesting things that I've discovered is that we have often found in programs when we've communicated with participants that they actually love the idea of being able to have opportunities provided where they can get together with other Housing First participants, with other individuals that are part of the program and have activities and do things together. Because in a sense, that's almost like having a whole bunch of peer specialists in a way, right? Where the more they're together, they can talk about common struggles that they're having, or they can just be in a group of people that they know are similar and that have been facing similar challenges, but yet they're all working towards stability in their lives and things like that. And so that's something that's come up for me before, where I think, you know, I think we have to be careful to not assume that the only way to have integration and positive social connection is with people that are sort of outside of the homelessness serving sector. So I don't know what your thoughts are about that, but yeah, I'm hoping that other people will comment as well on your question. So if any of you have thoughts for Jennifer, that would be great. You know, and if you've experienced similar things, but again, Jennifer, I'd say you're on the right track. I would also be curious to know if other people have had experiences related to what I just shared, in that, you know, your Housing First participants or clientele connecting with each other has been helpful. Sorry, you can see in the background, my slides keep changing. It's because I'm scrolling and doing things and whatever. While I'm waiting for maybe for some additional comments, I'm going to bring you back to the mindfulness activity that I started with. I think that there's a reason that people weren't jumping to sort of type in their problem on the chat for everyone to see. Part of that was because I didn't ask you to directly, but I think even if I did, there would have been very few, if any, people that would have typed that in. I'm going to go out on a limb and I'm going to guess that most of you probably felt inside when you heard the possibility of even typing that, no way, I'm keeping that to myself. And so I think that the whole moral of the story is that even when we think about our own selves, consider what it's like for then these individuals who are on the street, who are experiencing with the kinds of trauma and challenges and difficulties that they've had in their lives, why they probably have a tendency as well to keep things inward. And the connection is so important. And when we get these people connected, when we get them tied into things that are helpful and positive, that's when they really start to blossom and develop and and change and become more stable. And it's because that connection piece is so important. And so I'm going to suggest to all of you, whatever that challenge or problem was that you mentioned or thought of in your mind, I'm going to suggest that you will be able to effectively deal with that much more quickly and much more effectively the sooner you are able to reach out and connect with someone else about it. There's a reason why no one else knows about it if that was your situation. But I believe that's also the reason why you're probably still dealing with it. So the sooner you can involve other people who you trust in that, the sooner you'll be able to deal with that. So Kelly has asked a question. Kelly, I'm hoping that you're okay to talk. I'm just going to quickly look here and see if you've got a mic. I'm not sure. There's several of you, Kelly. There's several people that with your name on here, so I'm not sure which one. So I'm going to just go through and unmute them all, and then you can talk and share what you wanted to share. So you should be unmuted now. So if you have a mic, go ahead and talk. Looks like you're muted though yourself, so you'll have to unmute yourself. If that's not going to work, I'll just read out your statement. But okay, so maybe that's not gonna work so well. So what Kelly said is, when should we prioritize social and community integration? Our Housing First program is 3 years old, so trying to help people become stable, connected to supports and service providers, achieve goals, become sustainable in terms of their rent, it feels like social integration is almost last on the list. Yeah, and I think that that's a sort of a valid concern. But honestly, I actually try to encourage people to prioritize that as one of the first things that they do when they get people housed. If someone goes into their housing and they're feeling lonely and they're feeling like, you know, they have nothing around them, they're feeling bored because, you know, they're trying to stay in their house and so forth, it's going to be very difficult for them to want to even engage in those other goals. And again, those goals, the other thing I would say about this is we have to be doing as much as we possibly can to ensure that those goals are very client driven, that the goals are things that they have chosen, that they want to accomplish in their life, even if it's something that we don't necessarily think is a valid goal. I've heard multiple stories and situations about participants who have been hindered from moving forward and have almost been discharged from their Housing First program because the goals that the program is setting for them were not their goals. And they didn't have a say in it. And yet when a program turned around and allowed this individual to work towards something that they felt like had nothing whatsoever to do with the challenges that they were facing, they saw dramatic changes in that individual. And so I really think that unless people feel, I think that's a big part of feeling stable in their housing, is to feel like they are connected socially and within the community. So I don't know that it has to happen before anything else happens, but I think it's something that needs to be part of the work that we do with them from the beginning. Whether it's even stated as a goal or not, I think we should always have in the back of our mind, how can what we're doing with this person now develop greater social and community connection and integration? How can we build that in? Are the goals that they're wanting to work towards things that we can also help them establish better social relationships and so forth? You know, I really believe that a big part of what needs to happen immediately after a person moves into their new apartment is that they get to know their neighborhood and they get to know some of their neighbors. There's a program in my home community. It's actually it's a permanent supportive housing First based managed alcohol program primarily actually all Indigenous people that are in that program. And it really is something where it was the people of the most challenges that are part of that program. Huge neighbor reactions when this home was established, and lots of fight against it, lots of community meetings and so forth. Once the program actually helped the neighbors to know the names of the individuals that were living there, they saw a dramatic change just by knowing their name. And then they did things like having the participants go out and do some snow shoveling and things like that, just to be engaged and connected. So I think that there's huge benefit in making social and community integration a priority right from the beginning, but it's something that can be worked on in tandem with everything else, at least in my opinion. If anybody else has any thoughts or comments, then feel free to weigh in. Okay. Any other thoughts? Any other things that people are wondering about, curious about regarding social integration? I hope that there's been a few nuggets that you were able to take away from this, and that people are able to see the value and importance of creating social connections for individuals, and that it can look different in every situation. There's not, we don't have to be just focused on, scattered site housing. We don't have to just be focused on people being connected only to people who have never experienced homelessness. There's potentially other programs within your community that they might be able to tie into, like recreational programs and so forth. Okay, so Kelly is followed up with, she says that you previously mentioned about participants being discharged due to goals the program was setting instead of them. How important is it that our participants have goals? If participants are not working on goals, should this be a reason for discharge? What if our participants want to just live freely without feeling pressure of setting goals? That is a fantastic question, Kelly. And what I would say initially to that is that I think that we all have goals, and we may not necessarily state them, or we may not necessarily feel like that we can even sort of put them out there on the surface as goals all the time, but I think they're all there. So what I would say is, if a participant doesn't have any goals, and as you say, they want to just live freely without feeling that pressure, I think that's just them in that process of getting to a place where they feel stable and good enough about themselves and trusting enough of their environment and the people supporting them to feel like they can actually put a goal out there. Sometimes setting a goal for someone who's experienced homelessness and extreme trauma and things like that, to them, all that is they're setting themselves up for failure and pain and hurt. And so why do that? Especially when they're not sure that anything can even be accomplished. They're not even sure that they can stay in housing at the moment. So to answer your question, no, not having goals is not a reason to discharge someone out of your program. I would just take that as that just means that the workers who are spending time with that person just need to have more time to build a trusting relationship, and being more creative about how they interact with that individual. 99 times out of 100, when I hear about individuals who have been discharged because of a lack of engagement or lack of setting goals and so forth, it really boils down to that person doesn't trust. And we need to honor the reasons why they don't trust. And we need to accept that it's our job to build that trust, not theirs. And so I think that it really is more about the program, and that discharge should really only come when you know and you can say honestly that you have absolutely exhausted every choice, every option, every strategy that you can, and the individual is basically telling you that I don't want you in my life. And they're making it clear. But even when they say that, I think we need to still hold on for a while, because I think we need to realize that they are just in a place where they're making their way. So, but I would say that you know, you don't even have to word it as goals. Sometimes the word goals can be scary for people. Sometimes all that you need to do is just say to somebody, well, now that you're in your housing, what would you like to do? What are the most important things for you now? And maybe their goal is to live freely without feeling pressure. Well, then how can we help them do that? And that's where we bring the whole person-centeredness aspect into the work, that we can't get caught up thinking that there has to be something formalized all the time. And so, I don't know, that's my thoughts on that. And I'm sticking to it. So I hope that's helpful. And again, you know, others, please feel free to weigh in. Well, I don't see any other comments or questions. So again, the recording of this webinar will be available to you either by the end of the day or tomorrow morning. So it'll be available for review as long as you need. If you have other people from your team or your program or somewhere else that you think would like to see it and get some of the information off of it, then it'll be there and you can share it with them. As far as the slides, as you saw, there's not going to be a whole lot of slides that may or may not be helpful for you, but I will say that the video that I played, you can just Google that and find it. There's actually 5 different videos that Rain City Housing has made, all about different elements of Housing First. But if you just Google Rain City Housing, Housing First videos, you'll find them. And you can look up Johan Hari, or you can just Google Rat Park if you want to read more about that study. It's fascinating. Incidentally, what I will say to close off is read about Portugal. Portugal is a nation that at one point in time had 1% of their entire population was suffering from addiction. But they also had some of the harshest laws and regulations around dealing with addictions. And they did a 180, and instead of harsh laws, they turned to things like support and treatment and those kinds of things. And they have now seen a 50% reduction in their rates of addiction. And so I think that tells a story. So just to finish off here, I'm going to actually try to find my slides again really quickly, because I just wanted to let you know what's coming up in terms of future webinars. So March 5th, we have a by name list and coordinated access webinar on data and improvement. And we're looking at a presenter for that right now on a more specific topic. So information will be available for that soon. And then on March 19th, our next Housing First Community of Practice call will be on the topic of service array, which again is important. So otherwise, thanks everybody for your participation and for all the comments and for listening to me drone on and on. And if you have other requests or whatever, there's my contact information. Feel free to get a hold of us. But until the next time, thanks a lot and enjoy the rest of your day and have a great weekend. Bye-bye.